Hello, Elder Tehila Firewind here, High Priestess of the Covenant of the Open Mind, and you're watching Astrology 101. Hail and welcome. The topic this time is on reading and interpreting natal charts. So we finally get to put everything together and see how it's done. Now, I will say that we're going to use my birthday as an example. I'll do that one first. And then I'm going to use an anonymous person's birthday, someone who gave me permission to do this. And I'll say that some people tell you not to share your birthday information and the time and location and all of it because it can be bad luck or people could use it to target you in curses. And I just don't believe that anyone's going to get through my shield. So I'd love to see the person who could. So I just feel like with good shielding, you don't have to worry about that at all. So I share very openly, but you might want to consider it because the star chart will give someone basically unlimited access to a lot of very personal information. So that might not be something that you want to share with someone. So you should consider that before you share it. And that's why I'm making these lectures as well, so that people have the opportunity to do their own charts. If you're not interested in that, then you could pay me to do one. I do charts. You can find all of the listings on our website by following that link. There's also shops and stuff on there as well, and it's growing all the time. So, check it out and see what we offer. But if you're lazy, then you can go that route. But otherwise, let's get started looking at some examples so that you can go ahead and interpret your own chart. So I'm going to pause in between steps because I have to set up the chart, and that can take a while. So I don't want people to sit and stare at a chart while I do this. So I'm just going to pause now and put in all of the zodiacal signs, and then we'll do the planets, and I'll do it one step at a time so that everyone can basically see me build the chart. I don't want to redo the whole stellarium tutorial that's in an earlier lecture. I think lecture 4. And so if you want to do that, if you want to watch that tutorial, go to the earlier lecture. This one we're just going to focus on interpreting the chart, not building it. But I will show you putting it one step at a time together so that you can see how that's done as well. So I'm going to pause right now. I'll unpause it in just a minute. Okay, so first off, take a look at this screen. This is the flat wheel. This has nothing in it. This is what I provide in one of the earlier lecture series. And I'll make sure that there's a copy of this in the homework for this week as well. And what you should do is just copy and paste it using like a snipping tool and just open it in Paint. That's what I've done. And all I'm going to do is use the selection tool. There's like a little face in the way, so I'll wait till I pause it, but I'm going to use the selection tool to put the signs where they go in the chart. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll unpause again. Okay, so now I filled out the chart. First notice that I put the name, location, date, and time all right in the corner, and I do this because then I can make sure that I'm keeping track of the correct information and I don't accidentally type this whole chart out for someone using the wrong basic info. And then because my rising sign is Aquarius and Pisces, you can see that I've actually split the houses and I've drawn lines manually in between the houses using the line drawing tool so that I can keep track of where my zodiacal houses are with respect to the backdrop of the numbered houses. There are many people who do not do this, who would just pick one of these two, whichever one is more, if this one had just started to peak above the horizon, then they would consider that the rising sign. But like I said, in the winter, especially far north of the equator, you often will run into people with multiple rising signs, and I think that it matters. And we'll talk about that more as soon as I put in all the planets. So give me a moment. Okay, so now I added the planets. I wanted to record this next step because I don't remember if I showed everyone how to do this or not, but now I need to look up the retrogrades, and in order to do that I use what's called an ephemeris because sometimes noticing the movement in the planets in stellarium can be challenging. So the ephemeris says where they're actually located in the sky, and the constellation that it gives is not correct because these dates are not corrected for planetary precession, but the location is correct. So you can track the retrogrades by looking at an ephemeris, even if the dates that the ephemeris is based on are not correct. So what I do is I look to make sure that the numbers are going up for each planet. So 2351 is smaller than 2424, right, etc. So my birthday is the 9th, so that one's not retrograde. But Venus, let's see, Venus is retrograde. It's going down, and it's still going down on the 9th, so that's retrograde. Mars is not retrograde. Jupiter is not retrograde. Saturn is retrograde. Uranus is retrograde. Neptune is going down also. And Pluto is going up. So we've got Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and Venus, 4 retrogrades. So I'm just going to note that, and the moon phase in the bottom corner. And the moon phase is a new moon. So let me just put these in here. And then I usually, you could type it, but I usually copy the actual symbols in, which is going to take me a moment. So I'll pause the... Okay, so now the chart is complete. I just have to put the keywords in that reflect each individual sign. And then what I would normally do is use the keywords and look at where everything is located and actually interpret what it means. So for this one, I haven't interpreted it before, like not formally, so I don't have anything written down. So I'm just going to throw a whole bunch of thoughts and ideas out there and basically do like a verbal reading. And then for the second one, I'll actually show you what it would look like if I had done a reading for someone, because I've fully prepared it. So first, I'm going to copy in the keywords, and this I'll do live because it's a good refresher for people to see what the keywords of each of these signs are. I'm looking in my book of shadows, so I have pages on astrology. So yeah, so first off, the rising sign of Aquarius and Pisces. So some of the keywords: imaginative, sensitive, let's see, dreamer, escapist, vague, that's one, selfless, compassionate, and then, oh, let me make this box bigger. I know it's paint, it's not very good software, but, and then for Aquarius, detached, humanitarian, let's see, honest, loyal, independent. So those are some eccentric, so that and then we can start contrary. That's a good one. Contrary. Chaos is in the chart, so I'll write it down. Let's see, other keywords. My sun is in Leo, so let me flip to that page and copy down some keywords from Leo. Expressive, warm-hearted, open-minded. How about some from Virgo, since my sun is also in Virgo, so modest, shy, and intelligent, diligent, analytical. I'll just put anal, period, because there's not a lot of space. And then the moon is also in Virgo, so we can add a bunch of more terms, fussy, worrisome. Oh, I should probably mute the sound so it's not coming through real loud. There we go. Worrisome, perfectionist, or I'll just put harsh, because that's really what it is. And then maybe some keywords from significant planet placement. So the Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn is retrograde and it's exalted. So that's going to be pretty significant, and it's in between the 11th and 12th houses. So what we're going to see is a practical approach to religion. Likewise, there's going to be a lot of time spent on philosophy. And what else? Just looking for one more round of keywords. Let's see, Jupiter is in Leo, so spiritual growth, extrovert. So grows better in groups. Okay, something like that. So that might be the keywords. And then because it's paint, I always copy it just to make sure if it doesn't paste right. There, it's fine. Sometimes it gets cut off and stuff, so I have to redo it. So, okay, so that is how you get the chart set up. And I showed you kind of each step, but obviously I skipped all the in-between parts. I'll say I started recording this video at 2:30, and it's now, and there's been only 11 minutes of recorded time. So there's about 9 minutes it took of off-screen time for me to fully put this chart together. So as you can see, this is a time-intensive process. And now we're going to start interpreting it. So here we go. Okay, so first remember, the sun sign is your conscious self. The moon sign is the subconscious self. The rising sign is the true essence of the self. And the solar house is how people perceive you. So my solar house is Virgo, and my sun is in Leo, but it's on the cusp of Virgo. So it's close to entering Virgo, and that's why you see I placed it kind of on the line, but not quite in the middle, because it's not fully in the middle. It's still in Leo. But my moon is in Virgo. So what this means is that my emotions are almost non-existent, right? Because, I have Aquarius as a rising sign. I have my moon in Virgo. And so I'm just a very intellectual, analytical person. I'm very detached generally from the things that happen in the world around me. That detachment comes from my Aquarius rising sign. But at the same time, when I do experience emotions, often they're very strong, very profound. And that is the Pisces rising. So that's the influence of Pisces in my chart. I'm very empathic. And actually, it's interesting because if you notice, my moon is in opposition to my Pisces. So for me, how this manifests is that I have very few emotions when I'm by myself. And so when I'm around other people, I experience their emotions so strongly that it overrides my own sense of self. And I spent much of my life, getting lost in the groups of friends I had. I used to call myself a ditto, like the Pokemon, where I would just transform into whatever the group wanted me to be. And it's not like I did that because I didn't value myself. There's no self-loathing in this chart. Contrarily, I'm a very confident person, and that might even come from the placement of the sun and the moon, in Leo and Virgo, which Virgo can often be a very self-critical sign, but my sun is in Leo mostly, so I'm tempered by an open-mindedness, by an acceptance and a warm-heartedness even for myself. So there's no self-loathing in this chart, even though there is self-criticality. So I'm very critical of myself, but it's not because I don't like myself. In fact, it's the opposite. It's because I love myself and I want to be the best self that I can be. So that is the relationship between Virgo and the sun sign, Virgo and the moon sign, Leo and the sun sign in opposition to the rising sign. As you can see, when somebody has a chart this complex and the next one we'll be looking at is not this complex, it can be very hard. But these are specific statements. These are not things that would apply to any person. And that is the real power of astrology. When you look at the location of all of the planets in relation to each other, then you start to get a really good picture of how a person really is. So let's see what else there is in my chart. I know you'd think that I would know more about my own chart, but it's been ages since I looked at it. I do have my chart copied down into my book of shadows, though, so I have that. See, it's down here in the corner, but I don't look at it very often. Okay, so I have Venus, which is retrograde. So that's going to mean that I sometimes struggle to get along with people. And the reason why I struggle to get along with people can be told by the fact that Venus is directly in between Cancer and Leo. So I am very protective of the people that I care about. I'm fiercely loyal, right? So I have the protectiveness of Cancer, the loyalty of Leo, and together that comes to form a type of interacting with people. You know what? I just realized I forgot to put Mercury on here. Give me a second. Let me pause it. I'll add it. Okay, so now I've got Mercury in there, and I knew my Mercury was in Leo, but I just that it's important for what I was about to say. So because of the Mercury in Leo also, and Venus being between the two of them, so the way that I feel about other people is I'm very protective, and I want them to be the best that they can be, and I'm open-minded, right? So it's not like I'm saying I want them to be the best that I think is the best. I want them to be the best that they can be according to their own standards, right? But that still doesn't always come across well because of the Mercury in Leo, the nature of these signs. I often do come across as being patronizing or interfering. You know, people will reach out. It happened just today. People reach out to me for feedback on things, and I'll give them the feedback that they weren't looking for. You know, I'll be like, I'll criticize everything, and they're just like, no, just criticize this one thing. I just want to know if it's funny. I don't care if it's factually accurate or whatever. You know, so and I tend to stick my nose into other people's business and tell them how they could make themselves a better person, and it's at the point where sometimes it can be harsh. You know, and that's the influence of my Virgo in the 7th house. You know, so what do I bring to the table? What do I learn and teach? Harshness, lessons of cruelty. And it's not really cruel, because I am not doing it for myself. I'm never acting in a way to make myself feel better. My true self is detached, is unimportant, is selfless, right? That's the rising. That's the Pisces and Aquarius rising signs. So why do I sometimes treat people harshly? Well, sometimes that's what people need in order to improve themselves. And I am the kind of person who doesn't care what people think about me. You know, I don't at all care what anybody thinks about me ever, under any circumstances, pretty much. So I have the luxury of being able to treat people that way and not worry about the repercussions. Not everyone has that luxury. I sometimes will opt for dialogue options that other people would not even consider, because of how rude it could be, or how it could be misconstrued, or, you know, the fact that it's that could start shit. But, you know, look at where my Mars is located too. My Mars is in conjunction with my moon, which means a few things. It's all in Virgo. So it means a few things. One, it means that I don't like to do work that I'm not emotionally invested in. I am not productive if I don't care about the content, which is definitely true. And it also, because it's in Virgo, implies that it has to be something analytical, not I mean, I get very bored very fast with history, for instance. I like mathematics and science and things that involve breaking things down and programming, that sort of thing. And also, that lies in opposition to my rising sign, which is very creative. And so at times I will need to force myself to outlet some of my creativity in order to grow spiritually. And that is the relationship between the conjunction of the moon and Mars in Virgo in opposition to Pisces, and the moon and Mars in Virgo is also forming an aspect with Jupiter in Leo. So that's a lot. So these are very specific things too. So like I always tell people, like pop astrology doesn't even come close, right? Like look at how specific this gets. Okay, so it gets even more specific because the Virgo moon and Mars conjunct, that's all in between two houses, the 7th and the 8th. So what that says is that I approach relationships like they are something to be solved, like they are a business transaction, not for the sake of emotion. Who I love is separate from who I am in a relationship with. I love many people. I love all of my friends. I love my parents. And for me, it's all the same kind of love, unconditional. There's no difference between the way I love my mother and the way I love my husband. The choice to have sex with my husband is not related to my feelings for him. Okay, it's related to hormones, to impulses, to my sexuality, which for me are very detached, are very separate components of myself, right? So you see that detachment coming through. And so what this says is that, in relationships, it's about what do we offer each other? What do we bring to the table? Are we accomplishing more together than we would apart? But it's also in the 8th house. And so the 8th house, that's the house of transformation. So how do I go about helping other people transform? By triggering them emotionally with aggressive comments. Which is exactly what I do. I can't sound not aggressive if I try. I mean, I chalk it up to being German because Germans are very angry people. But a lot of it is my stars, is that this is just who I am. And it's hard for me to go against a conjunct in my 7th and 8th house, So as much as I wish that I could just get along with people and be friends to everyone and be that person that just smiles, and kind of like the character in The Office, Aaron, if you know who I'm talking about, in the later seasons. I wish I could be just like that and I could just have fun and that would be my life, but that's not who I am, and I'd be living a lie, and I could do it, but I don't think that I'd be happier doing that and not really being myself. So it's one of those situations where you can wish that you were a different way, even though you don't really want to be a different way. You want to be yourself, So that's where I'm at. A lot of contradiction in my chart and in my life, in case that's not abundantly obvious. So there you go. Okay. What else is in this chart? I'll try to spend like 5 more minutes on this, and then I'll do the second example. Let's see, my Pluto is in between the 8th and 9th, and it's in Libra. So what that is telling me is that I struggle to find balance in things, and it can affect me spiritually. If I don't, if I don't feel like I'm completed, if I don't feel whole, if I don't have people to interact with about my spirituality, then I begin to lose energy and I get exhausted and even sometimes depressed, and it's because I feel like I've lost focus. I feel like I'm not on the right path anymore, and I'm not being the spiritual person I'm meant to be, and that's the influence of that Pluto. I mentioned the Jupiter, but the fact that Jupiter is between the 7th and 6th house, and the fact that most of my signs are in the southern hemisphere, I've got a bowl pattern going on. I'm going to tend to focus on my calling. Remember, the 6th house is your calling. My calling is going to be bringing people together for spiritual growth in an open-minded setting. Look at this, right? It's in my chart, and I formed the covenant of the open mind before I ever looked at my chart. So it's crazy how accurate this is now, looking at this years later. I learned astrology many years ago. So my Jupiter is right in between the 6th and 7th. So I will be focused on bringing people together to form, opportunities for spiritual growth. And I'll care less about my own spiritual growth than the spiritual growth of the community that I'm building. So that's where our coven comes from. So that's pretty cool. And then let's see. So let's talk a bit more about some of the smaller signs here. So there's not a very large influence from Aries, Taurus, Gemini, but they do play some role. So Aries is in between the 2nd and 3rd house, which means that I'm going to be impulsive, when it comes to financial and physical stability. So for me, I feel like the financial aspect I don't struggle with nearly as much as I would have, because my mom was like stereotypical Jewish mother, and like I was raised in a very strict budget. But I do have moments where I just like buy things and I don't know why, because I can't afford them. And it's only stuff that I need though. So it's never like, but so that's the influence of Aries, of that impulsive feeling. And then you get like the Aries and Taurus 3rd house. So that's going to mean that my expression is going to waver. I try to be seen as very passionate, very but at the same time, someone who is reliable, who will always be there for you. I try very hard to remain patient, even though I'm actually not a very patient person. It's something that I've practiced and that I consciously focus on. Let's see what else. It also means that I'm self-indulgent at times, which I am. So, and I can come across to people as being aggressive and inflexible, and that's like not even on purpose. That's just a combination of Aries and Taurus in my 3rd house. That's so my patronizing nature blends with this aggressive and seemingly inflexible energy, and it meshes with my solar house, which is Virgo, and people just think that I'm a terrible person that would never change my view under any circumstances, so why bother talking to me? And I just always cross the line, and I give no regard for how other people are going to feel about that. And that's totally not true. That's just how I come across. Those are only the expression, right? So the solar house of Virgo, the solar house, that's how people see me. The Mercury and Sun sign in Leo, that's like consciously in the way that I communicate, is I can be patronizing or interfering or bossy. And then you have the expression of Aries and Taurus in that 3rd house, and all of those things together give people a picture of me that's not even close to who I really am. And so I have had to spend a lot of time tapping into the other qualities that I possess in order to change these perceptions, but there are some things that I struggle to change. So like I really don't have any idea how I sound, and I know I always sound angry when I'm passionate, and I just don't hear it. Like I just don't get it. And so that's something that's very difficult. Like not what I'm saying, I can change what I'm saying, that's easy, but changing how it sounds when it comes out of my mouth is much harder. And so what I've started to do lately is record my interactions with people, my discussions, because then I can hear how I sound, and I sound much different in discussions than I do in lectures. So so that's another difference that comes out because of the interaction with other people, because I'm a very different person when I'm by myself. I'm a lot more detached and a lot less emotional, and I care a whole lot less about things. So that's that's an interesting part of me. And then Gemini in the 4th and 5th house, that means that I suck at finishing things. I do. I start things and never finish them. I've got the 2 of the very emotional, not keeping track of things signs in the 4th and 5th. So, I also have issues with my family often that come down to communication. My family is very nervous, it's very tense and a very intense environment growing up, and I'm sure it will be the same for my children eventually. So that's an example of the 4th house applying to both scenarios. But despite that intensity, it's still very loving and very warm, and that's the influence of Taurus in the 4th house. I see a lot of contradictions and a lot of intense energy in a chart where the houses are split like this. And then Cancer and Gemini in the 5th, that is, like I said, not very good at completing things, at getting to the point of completion, or contrarily, not knowing when to give up, right? That would be the influence of Cancer. Cancers have issues letting things go. So that would mean that, like, I get caught up with things sometimes and I want to finish them even when other people have moved on. And that can actually be a source of frustration for me. Like, I had a party once where they were all like totally done with the debate and I was like, he did not win this debate. We just ran out of time. Like, we should keep talking about this. But they wanted to move on and play a different game. So I just like went in the kitchen and got another drink and, finished the conversation in my own head. And then I went back in and it was fine, right? But I couldn't just switch. I couldn't just turn a switch and suddenly be on a new topic like everyone else, because I like to see things through to fruition. That's the influence of Cancer. In the 9th and 10th house, I have Scorpio and Ophiuchus. I don't have any signs in Ophiuchus, which is odd since there's so much chaos in my chart, but that's why there's proof that there's many different ways that chaos can be expressed in a chart. In my case, it comes from the fact that I have so many things that are like on the cusp and multiple rising signs, etc. And that's how you know it's chaotic good too, because there's no like chaos bad in my chart either. It's all just chaos good, so that's good. Scorpio in the 9th and 10th, that's sitting right on the midheaven, which we just spoke about in the last lecture series. So that's just going to mean that I have I'm very determined to make a name for myself, and not necessarily because it's what I want for myself, but because that is what I feel like the world needs, and that modality of that attitude of giving back to the world through manipulating them for their own sake, basically, like kind of like, I guess, what Nietzsche said, but way less extreme, because I don't believe in interfering with free will. I just believe in telling people when they're wrong and that they should fix themselves and letting them figure out if they actually want to do that or not. Now, I know this is running long, so I'm moving quick here. The Uranus and Neptune, those two are in Sagittarius, and so that's true for many people. They move very slowly, so everyone who's born around the same, time frame as me will have that, and that is really what embodies like each generation, or that the slower moving planets are in different places generally for every person. In this case, the Neptune and Uranus being between the 10th and 11th house, that's just going to basically mean that our perception of self is defined by the way we interact with the world, right? So in our generation, people that have the sign alignment are going to view the way that they interact on social media and via the internet as being a critical part of who they are. You're defined by the way that you interact on the internet and how people see you on the internet, not just who you are in everyday life. I already talked about the Saturn exaltation and retrograde in Capricorn. That is where my spiritual intelligence comes from. It's a very strong pull towards introspection, spending time considering yourself and how to be the very best self that you can be, and disciplining yourself. So I don't have a lot of discipline when it comes to some things, but when it comes to other things, I have a buttload. And that would be the influence of this Saturn. So kind of rushed a little bit, but I didn't even talk about the retrogrades of Uranus and Neptune in my chart, but they're not that important because they're right next to an exalted sign. So but they do form an aspect, so I could dig so much deeper into this. I've already run longer than I wanted to on my chart though, so just know that these charts are not always this complicated, but they are always this extensive. There are always many things to consider when you're looking at someone's star chart. Okay, I'm going to pause for a minute and bring up the other star chart, and then we'll look at the anonymous one. Okay, so this is the same example that's up on the website right now for anyone who is interested in potentially buying a star chart. This is what I show them to see what the finished product would look like. So as you can see, I take this same image and I put it into a Google document, and then I just do all of the description of what I read and the summary and the topical details. So what I want to do is, maybe I need to download it to get the view I want. Let me do that. And open it in, oh no, it's a PDF. I can't open it in Word. I wanted to view this page. Maybe if I just view out and zoom out enough, it'll put the pages side by side. Nope, it's not. Okay, well, how about I open this and put these side by side. There we go. Okay, so that way we can keep looking at this chart while I scroll through the document. So this is what I send people when I do professional readings for them. Sorry about the camera, there's dust all over my screen. And I tell them the solar month, I look up the retrogrades, the phase of the moon, all of these things could be significant. Note that I put the location on the star chart image itself to make sure I get that right, but then I also put the image up, or I also put it up in the top as a part of the page. So if you're looking to get into professional readings, you can feel free to use this template and do the same thing. I'm not trying to corner the market on astrology chart readings. Obviously, I'm here to teach. So if you see here, there are many cusps, okay? So I put like a dashed line over the first and second house because even though there's only one rising sign, Cancer is on the cusp of being a rising sign. So that might have a small influence on it, but it's not going to be big enough that I should divide the houses up like I did the other time. And then I also noted that the sun is on the cusp of Scorpio and between the Ophiuchus and Scorpio, so that's going to have an element of transformation added to the chart. And so you know what? Let me just read the reading that I did, and if I have any additional notes, I'll add them. So here I said you're a very dynamic person. That's due to the nature of all the cusps. Cancer is on the cusp of rising. The sun is on the cusp of Scorpio. The solar house also does not match the sun sign, so that means that the house will be influenced by two signs, and people will struggle to know who this person really is. The sun is in Ophiuchus, so this is a good example of that. Ophiuchus has a lot of the same qualities that people had previously associated with Scorpio. They share rulership of the 8th house, as I mentioned before. So this would mean that she's a mysterious and adventurous person. That's the influence of Ophiuchus. Someone who like knows exactly what will happen, and doesn't, someone who doesn't like knowing exactly what will happen. Magnetic and exciting, seen as someone who likes to take chances or live on the edge. Others would think this person is foolhardy or careless. That would be the influence of Sagittarius, which typically embodies irresponsible choices or acting without thinking. But in reality, this person just operates on a different wavelength. So what other people would call naivety is really like instinct or intuition or some other quality. This person doesn't have to carefully consider everything before acting. Here it is, because they're very instinctual and they listen to their intuition. So that's, Cancers tend to be very intuitive. So that's the influence of Cancer. It's not a strong influence, just a small one, because it's just on the cusp of rising. They might not remember how they got from one thought to the next. So that's the influence of Gemini. They would be certain that that chain exists somewhere deep down inside of them, because they're very intellectual generally. So in this case, the emotions would lie often in contradiction to the true self. The experiences of their life will detract from their spiritual purpose as well, and that's an aspect that's being formed between a bunch of planets. So this may manifest as exhaustion. If it's allowed to fester, it could become ideations of self-harm. So this person needs to definitely keep track of that, and they'll feel a strong urge to understand and explain to others how they feel. As for them, it'll be hard to accept irrationality, especially when it brings pessimism or doubt of some kind. So that's the influence of a bunch of planets, but namely the moon in Sagittarius and Leo in the 3rd house. The Mercury in Sagittarius, that results in being very straightforward and honest. Sagittarius is known for that. sometimes they might inadvertently avoid sharing the truth. That would be the sun in Ophiuchus. I say inadvertent, but it would be a conscious thing. So they would choose not to share the truth, but it's not because they're trying to be secretive necessarily. They're just not interested in sharing it or speaking at that moment. This person would be very good at confounding others into believing that they understand. And that would be the influence of Gemini rising in opposition to Mercury. So Mercury is the sign of communication, and Gemini is a sign of like often like mental confusion, but also intellectualism, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, I realize, but it's just like people who are very intelligent, but they don't know why. They can't follow their own steps logically from one point to another. So this would mean also that they need to be careful not to get caught up in the Saturn in Pisces. That indicates they need to be careful not to get caught up in some kind of like a delusional fantasy world, because Saturn is how they spend time, and the Saturn in Pisces would mean that they spend a lot of time dreaming or being in their own little world, especially because Saturn is retrograde. So that means that it has an especially strong influence. And there's also a sextile aspect here, where that R in Pisces is, the Saturn R in Pisces is sextile to the sun, and to the rising sign. So the song Hello from Evanescence rings a bell, because it can be negative, but it can also be positive, that they have small ego. They can be more empathic towards other people, more capable of learning to speak other people's languages, so that they can communicate better. But at the same time, like having a small ego plus the ideations of self-harm found throughout the other parts of the chart could indicate depression or some like issues loving themselves. So then there's also there's a bunch of signs in Sagittarius, which I don't know when I get to talking about that down here. So in matters of love, right? So there's a lot of signs in the 7th house. So there's a lot of influence when it comes to relationships in this chart. So open-mindedness is definitely there because of the Sagittarius, but also like shifting emotions, and sometimes it's hard to pin down how they actually feel, and they could get swept off their feet and make irresponsible choices when it comes to relationships that are based largely on shallow feelings. They can be careless and trust too easily. That's all the influence of Sagittarius on those many different planets and the house. So they really have to be wary of anyone who claims to understand how they feel, especially because they don't always understand how they feel. So anybody who claims to should be found suspect, really. They have some social anxiety depending on the movements of some of the planets. That's the result of the Cancer and Gemini rising, which are both moody signs. So depending on if things are retrograde or where planets are located, they might find themselves going through weird moods. That's also like a sensitivity to planetary motions that comes out of the Gemini rising and the opposition of that to the moon sign in Sagittarius. So you get this weird nervousness or tension that might happen sometimes for no reason, and a sensitivity to like the locations of the planets. And that really just comes out of the fact that like this chart is very it's very sporadic. It's got a lot of signs and it's got a lot of planets in some signs and very little influence in others, but there's like a little chaos thrown in there as well. Let's see. So the person wants to work towards a better world, and they feel most productive working alongside a partner. That's what Mars in the 7th house often can mean. For the record, I also identify with that statement, and my Mars is if you recall, it's in between the 7th and 8th house. So that makes complete sense. So that's the trait that I have in common with this person. Let's see. So this person will flirt with people and be sociable in general. They'd rather feel like work is a good time. They definitely can't do anything that's like sit by yourself and be bored. This person would be very extroverted. And this can come across even as clinginess. So that's the influence of all of these signs, really. Sagittarius, Gemini, Cancer, particularly for the clinginess. But Sagittarius is a very extroverted sign generally. So their spiritual practices come from a place of like trying to stay grounded or feeling grounded. And that is the influence of Taurus in the 12th house. You know, they might be hesitant to analyze themselves or to look inwards on themselves. And they might feel like they don't have very much to offer. And that would all be Taurus in the 12th house. And they can be impulsive as well in what they believe and like think they're ready when they're not, or believe in things that don't actually make sense, that they just think make sense. And that would be the influence of Aries in the 11th, plus the fact that they're Gemini rising, which means that sometimes they'll be able to make sense of things that are nonsensical, like because Geminis do that basically. So that's pretty much like this person's chart. It's a little less dynamic than mine was because they have only one rising sign. So the real true essence as a Gemini is going to be, you know, very flirty, flighty, nervous, tense, and then they're going to find that that being around other people reduce the tension or the nervousness that they're experiencing, and that's the result of the Sagittarius and that being in opposition to her. So if you're looking at a chart like this, you can also say some things about like a person's element. You know, everyone's always saying like, what's my element? So you can find that out by experimenting and like go walk around barefoot in the woods, and if you don't like that, then you're probably not an earth sign. You know, try like going out on a really windy day and walking around, and if you don't like being blown around, then you're probably not an air sign. If you don't like being in the water and you don't like swimming, then you're probably not a water sign. And you can use that. And sometimes, because the star chart is just a blueprint, people do think they have different elements than their chart might indicate. Now, a chart like this, there's a lot of signs in Sagittarius in fire. There's a little bit in earth. There's spirituality comes from a place of earth. Their sun is in spirit, right? So Ophiuchus is spirit or chaos. And the rising sign is air. So you're going to find a very masculine polarity in this person, someone who is probably aligned with air or fire, someone who probably does evocation magic very well, and who generally can't handle experiencing the same things many times in a row. They have to constantly be shaking it up, or they get very exhausted by life, right? So so that, and then I gave a summary. So in the charts I do for people, I give summaries. This is just high level with all elements in your chart and a lot of influences pulling a lot of different ways. You are a dynamic person who fluctuates often and with no rhyme or reason. Still, you're always honest and seek to understand and explain how you feel to the best of your ability. You get along well with people, even though sometimes you get restless, and seek out new friendships and new experiences to bring fresh perspectives into your life. You are flirty and communicative, an optimist, and yet someone who can calculate their next move instinctually, making mistakes infrequently, unless it comes to love. You have a lot of potential and as a spiritual leader, and will find little else satisfies you in the same way. Right? So, so that's like a very high level overview of what I found in their chart. You know, this is the kind of thing that you would read on a website, and this could apply to like lots of people, you know. That's why I also dig deep and pull out some of the stuff that, you know, I feel sometimes is like, is this true? Like, I did not pick up on this. So, then I break it down a little bit about like things that are going to happen in love. So who to look for, you know, look for Taurus and Aquarius in their charts, avoid Capricorn and Scorpio, you know. So I tell people that kind of information, how they get along with people in general. You know, at times this person prefers to just close off and surround themselves in their own little world because that's this influence here, because dealing with other people's crap is very exhausting. And then you can actually like look at notable events in someone's life, right? Because the returns of all these planets, they'll return at different times. And you can like look at the Stellarium. You can be like, okay, well, where are all the planets in the chart when Saturn returns around 30 years later, then 60 years later, etc. So when that happens, where are all the planets? So I looked into it for Jupiter. It says when Jupiter returns into Capricorn, they will, based on the rest of their planets, they will be able to grow much more easily from the past experiences in their life. That's their maximum potential for positive growth, as long as they stay realistic, and that they should be careful because the negative happenings in their life will affect their ability to grow. And that is going to be, it's going to basically be like any amount of pessimism takes away from the optimism of the Sagittarius influence for them. So you can like look at when all the returns will happen and type out what energy they'll be dealing with when the returns come, which gives people some idea of what's going to happen and when. I had one chart where I told the guy, I was actually kind of dumb because I know what year he was born. It's right there at the top. But I said something that will happen in the future for him at like the age of like 45 or something. I said he would get a divorce or a pet would die or something like that. And he was like, oh my God, I did get a divorce when I was 45, because it turned out he was like in his 50s or something already. Yeah, so that was really cool. So that kind of stuff you can actually predict, like not exactly what will happen, but like you'll have a fight with your family and there's going to be some amount of separation or loss. You know, that's basically what I got from the chart, and that turned out to be divorce in that case. So there you go. So those are some examples. Let me see if I had remembered that you can check out our website if you want me to do a chart for you, or you can see what other listings there are as well. And that's it. So there's just one lecture left. It's probably going to be a quick one on electional astrology, divination, and medical. So those are all different options. This is the end of natal astrology. At this point, you should be able to copy your own information down out of Stellarium and interpret your own chart. And next time I'll just go over a couple alternatives. It should be very quick. It's just going to be a little overview, and that way you'll know all the applications of astrology, not just natal chart interpretation. And the homework this week, I have you read about natal astrology, some things like dignity and exaltation, things that I mentioned that are really related to the location of the planets, like accidental dignity. Honestly, a lot of this I don't really reference that often. Exaltation is definitely an important one, but I would check all these things out. It's not that much reading, just so that you have all the background, you know, to say you did it. Anyway, that's the end of this week, and from all of us here at the Covenant of the Open Mind, blessed be.